Welcome to Battleground Times. This is where war turns into dark. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for your support. Now, let's begin. November 3rd, 2009, 8:47 p.m., 42 miles northwest of Groom Lake, or you're sitting inside a reinforced command vehicle, watching thermal scans that show nothing. The desert stretches flat and dark in every direction. Your team has been here for 6 weeks conducting operations to recover test wreckage, mostly unmanned aerial vehicles, occasionally weather balloons drifting south. Things are stable until something happens. And tonight, the routine ended precisely at 8:51 p.m. when something fell silently from 70,000 feet. I'm Captain Mason Hale. I command Sierra 5, a joint recovery unit attached to the 99th Air Wing at Nellis Air Force Base. Our mission was simple on paper. If something fell outside the restricted test zones, we were to secure it before civilians did. If it fell in, we coordinated with range control and stayed behind. Our authority was defined by GPO's coordinates and reinforced by career-ending consequences. My team consisted of 3 others. Lieutenant Cole Harrow handled aeronautical analysis. He could identify aircraft debris from a single panel fragment. Technical Sergeant Drew Salazar ran our electronic surveillance and signal intelligence. Specialist Leon Briggs managed security protocols and threat assessment. He'd done 2 tours in Iraq and treated every perimeter like hostile ground. We operated out of a mobile command post positioned along the eastern boundary of R-48A8 November, the most restricted airspace in the continental United States. The locals called it Area 51. We called it the Box. Everything inside belonged to programs we didn't have clearance to know about. Our job was to keep the outside world from seeing what fell out. The night of November 3rd started unremarkable. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees after sunset. A steady wind came from the west, carrying fine dust that got into every seal and crevice of our equipment. Our vehicle sat parked on a dirt track 300 yards from the boundary marker. It was a single white post with faded numbers. Beyond it, the land looked identical, but crossing that line without authorization meant discharge and federal charges. Earl was running diagnostics on our tracking software when the first anomaly appeared on the screen. He called it out quiet and calm, his voice betraying no emotion despite the oddity of the data. "Captain, I've got something on a descending trajectory. No transponder, no engine signature." I moved to his screen to see for myself. A single blip descended rapidly through restricted airspace. The altitude dropped from 70,000 to 40,000 in less than 90 seconds. The descent rate was fundamentally wrong. It was too fast for a parachute and yet too controlled for a free fall. "Are you range control aware?" I asked. Salazar shook his head. "Radio's been quiet since 20,000. No flight activity reported." That wasn't unusual. When classified tests ran, they shut us out completely. We'd sit in the dark for hours while something happened 10 miles away, but this felt different. The object's trajectory suggested a malfunction or a controlled descent, not a test drop. At 20,000 feet, it leveled briefly, then continued down. Harrow tracked it with precision. Projected impact zone is 800 meters inside the box, just past the ridge. Inside meant hands off. I reached for the radio to report it anyway, as it was standard procedure. But before I could transmit, Salazar raised his hand. "Hold. I'm getting interference." His equipment showed a surge of electromagnetic noise across multiple frequencies. It lasted 10 seconds, then faded. When it cleared, the descending object vanished from our screen. "Lost contact," Harrow said. "Last known position puts it down approximately 900 meters west-northwest inside the restricted zone." I tried the radio again. "Range control, Sierra 5. We have a possible unscheduled impact in Sector Delta 27. Request confirmation and status." "Static," answered. "Clean, empty static. No response." Briggs checked his sidearm without being told. Old habits. Salazar switched frequencies and tried again. Nothing. The airwaves were dead in a way that felt intentional. "Could be a drone," Harrow offered. "Experimental flight path. Controlled descent into a designated recovery area." That made sense. It had happened before, but the electromagnetic pulse and the radio silence didn't fit the pattern. I made a decision based on protocol and instinct. We hold position and log the event. If it crossed the boundary, it's not our problem. We document and wait for orders. For 20 minutes, we sat in silence. I wrote the time, coordinates, and observations in my field log. Briggs watched the ridge through the night optics. Salazar monitored signals. Harrow ran simulations on the descent profile. Everything pointed to something small, maybe 6 to 8 feet in length, coming down in a controlled manner. Then at 21:14 hours, Salazar picked up a new signal faint, oscillating, coming from the direction of the impact site. "Captain, I'm reading a transmission. Low frequency. It's not any military band I recognize." I looked at his screen. The waveform pulsed in a steady rhythm. "Not random interference, or not natural. Can you isolate it?" "Working on it." He adjusted filters and boosted gain. The signal sharpened into a repeating sequence. 3 short bursts. Pause. 3 short bursts. Over and over. Harrow leaned closer. "That's not a distress beacon, military or civilian. The pattern is wrong." The signal continued for 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Silence returned, but heavier now. I tried range control again. This time, a voice answered. Calm, clipped, unfamiliar. "Sierra 5, maintain position. Do not approach restricted boundary. Acknowledge." I recognized the tone. This wasn't our usual controller. "Sierra 5 acknowledges. Holding position. Can you confirm status on unscheduled impact in Delta 27? Negative information available. Continue observation. Stand by for further instruction." The line went dead before I could respond. Briggs looked at me with the expression I'd seen before, the one that said something wasn't adding up. "They're already moving on it," he said quietly. "If something came down inside the box, response teams deployed fast." The fact they told us to stand by meant they wanted us out of the way while they worked. Standard procedure, but the radio silence before the call felt wrong. At 21:30 hours, headlights appeared in the distance. They didn't come from the main road, they came from inside the restricted zone. 3 vehicles moving without formation lights. They drove directly toward the ridge where the object had landed. I counted 2 trucks and what looked like a cargo transport, all unmarked. Haro adjusted the thermal scope, civilian models. No military profile. Contractors than the kind that showed up for jobs nobody else could touch. They worked fast and left nothing behind. We watched them stop near the ridge. Doors opened. Figures moved in coordinated silence. Red lights flickered briefly, the kind that protected night vision. Then everything went dark again. Salazar's monitor flared again. Another electromagnetic surge. It was stronger this time. The equipment registered interference across the entire spectrum for 5 seconds, then normalized. "Whatever they're doing out there," Salazar muttered, his voice tight. "It's generating a hell of a field." I felt it too. A faint, uncomfortable pressure in my chest, like standing too close to high-voltage power lines. The air in the vehicle tasted metallic. I glanced at my wrist. My watch had lost 2 minutes without explanation. Briggs checked his compass. The needle spun in lazy, erratic circles before finally settling north again. "That's not standard recovery," Harrow whispered. No, it wasn't. And the longer we sat there watching, the more I realized we were seeing something that didn't fit our operational briefings. This wasn't a drone recovery. Drones didn't emit electromagnetic pulses. They didn't make compasses spin. They didn't require unmarked contractor teams appearing in the dead of night. At 2:48 hours, the radio crackled again. It was the same unfamiliar voice as before. "Sierra 5, you are now designated outer perimeter observation. Maintain visual logs only. Do not transmit unless directed. Acknowledge." I keyed the mic. "Sierra 5 acknowledges outer perimeter. Visual logs only." The controller's response was immediate. "Correct. You will receive further instruction at 0600. Hold position until relieved." The line cut off. I set the handset down and looked at my team. Outer perimeter observation wasn't a standard designation for a recovery unit like ours. It meant we were part of a containment effort now, not a recovery mission. They were drawing a circle around whatever had fallen, and we were parked right on the edge of it. Arrow broke the silence. "Sir, if they're classifying us as perimeter, that means the impact site is still active. They wouldn't need containment for debris." I nodded slowly. He was right. Debris got bagged, logged, and transported. Containment protocols were reserved for hazards biological, chemical, radiological, or something else entirely. Salazar pointed at his screen. The signal was back. Same pattern, 3 bursts, pause, repeat. This time it lasted longer. The waveform pulsed steady and clear. It was almost deliberate. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't random interference. It felt like communication, though I had no idea who or what was on the other end of that line. Briggs stepped outside and scanned the horizon with the night optics. The wind had died down completely. The desert sat still in a way that felt unnatural. No sound, no movement, just the faint hum of our generator and that signal pulsing through Salazar's equipment inside. When Briggs came back in, his face was tight with a look I'd seen in combat. "There's something out there, Captain. Near the ridge. I can't get a clear image, but it's not a vehicle. Too small, maybe 6 feet long, smooth profile." Haro pulled up the thermal overlay. A faint heat signature appeared exactly where Briggs described. It wasn't hot, just slightly warmer than the surrounding sand. The shape was vague but consistent. It was cylindrical, tapered at one end. "That's not debris," Haro said quietly. No, it wasn't. Debris cooled fast in the high desert air. This object held temperature as if it were generating its own internal heat. I made another decision. "Briggs, Salazar, gear up. We're moving to the boundary for a closer look. Haro, use down comms. If anyone calls, we're conducting a routine perimeter check." We pulled on our jackets, grabbed high-output flashlights, and stepped into the biting cold. The walk to the boundary marker took 3 minutes. Every step felt heavier than the last. The air pressed against my skin like static electricity. My ears popped twice without any change in elevation. At the marker, I stopped. The white post looked small and fragile against the endless black of the desert. Beyond it, the ridge rose maybe 40 feet. The object sat just past the crest, barely visible, even with the optics. Salazar held up a handheld signal detector. It screamed immediately. "Massive M field. It's coming from that direction." Briggs raised his rifle instinctively, then lowered it. "What the hell generates a field like that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. My training covered aircraft, munitions, and hazardous materials. Nothing in that training explained what we were looking at. The object sat motionless, emitting a signal in a field strong enough to disrupt equipment from hundreds of meters away. Then the contractors moved again. I saw the red lights shift positions around the object. They worked methodically, setting up equipment I didn't recognize. One held what looked like a scanning frame. Another positioned a tripod-mounted device aimed directly at the object. They're crossing the line just a few steps, close enough to see what they were recovering. But I'd been a soldier long enough to know that curiosity was a luxury we couldn't afford. The line existed for reasons that didn't require explanation. We stood there in silence, watching men work on something we weren't cleared to understand. The signal pulsed. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that tonight, the desert was showing us something it wasn't supposed to. We returned to the command vehicle at 22,000 deep into my bones, but it wasn't the temperature that made me shiver. Salazar's equipment still registered the electromagnetic field. It was weaker now, but persistent. The signal pattern had changed again. Instead of 3 bursts, it transmitted a continuous low-frequency tone that made my teeth ache. Haro looked up from his console when we entered. "Range control called while you were out. They want a status report at 02,000, nothing before then." That gave us 3 hours. 3 hours to sit and watch something we couldn't explain happening less than a kilometer away. I poured coffee from the thermos and tried to organize my thoughts. The object wasn't debris. The contractors weren't conducting a standard recovery, and the field it generated didn't match any technology in our operational briefings. Briggs sat cleaning his rifle, a nervous habit he'd developed overseas. "Sir, what do you think it is?" I knew what he was asking. Everyone in that vehicle wanted to know. But speculation was dangerous, especially about things above our clearance level. "Doesn't matter what I think," I told him. "It's inside the box. That makes it someone else's problem. Signal's degrading. Whatever's generating it is either powering down or being suppressed." Haro pulled up the thermal overlay again. The heat signature near the ridge had dimmed significantly. "They're doing something to it. Temperature's dropping fast. Could be a cooling protocol or a containment procedure." At 22:34 hours, the contractor vehicles started moving. They weren't moving away from the site, but repositioning. They formed a loose perimeter around the object. More red lights appeared, dozens of them marking a boundary within the boundary. Whatever they were protecting, they were taking it seriously. Then the electromagnetic pulse hit again. It was stronger than before. Every piece of electronic equipment in our vehicle screamed at once. Screens flickered wildly. Static roared through the speakers, and the lights dimmed to a sickly brown. The pulse lasted 7 seconds. When it cleared, half our systems were offline. Salazar worked fast, rebooting equipment and checking for damage. Jesus, he said. That was at least 10 times stronger than the first one. If we'd been any closer, he didn't finish the sentence. We all understood. Impulses of that magnitude could fry unshielded electronics. They could also cause biological effects at close-range disorientation, nausea, cardiac arrhythmia. The contractors must have been using hardened equipment and protective measures we didn't have. Harrow's screen came back online, but it was riddled with diagnostic errors across multiple systems. GPS is offline. Comms are intermittent. Thermal imaging is corrupted. We're basically blind right now, Captain. I grabbed the radio handset and tried to reach range control. All I got was dead air. I switched to the backup frequency. Still nothing. We were cut off, sitting on the edge of a restricted zone that had just knocked out our primary communications and tracking systems. Briggs looked at me with the question we were all thinking but were hesitant to voice. "Do we fall back, sir?" The order said to hold position. But those orders assumed we would have working equipment and constant contact with command. Right now, we had neither. I made the call based on my responsibility to the mission. We stay. Salazar, get comms back up. Priority 1. Harrow, switch to manual navigation and keep logging everything we can observe. Briggs, eyes on the perimeter. If anything moves toward us, I want to know immediately. They moved without hesitation. Good soldiers don't question in the moment of crisis. They execute and trust the chain of command. As I watched them work, I hoped that trust wasn't misplaced. By 2255 hours, Salazar had restored partial communications. The signal was weak and full of interference, but it was a link to the outside world. I tried range control again. This time, a voice answered. It was different from the previous controller, rougher, more urgent. Sierra 5, report status. I responded clearly. We experienced electromagnetic interference at 2234. Multiple systems temporarily offline. Currently restoring capabilities. No personnel injuries. Maintaining position as ordered. Silence stretched for 10 long seconds. When the voice returned, it carried a tone I didn't like. Copy. Sierra 5. Be advised, safety perimeter has been extended. Your position is now inside the outer containment zone. Do not attempt to relocate. Remain in vehicle. Confirm. Confirm. My chest tightened. We were inside the containment area now without moving an inch from our original post. Sierra 5 confirms. Remaining in vehicle. Request clarification on containment parameters. The reply was curt. Negative details. Just hold position. Recovery team will brief you at 06 PS. The line cut off before I could ask another question. I set the handset down and looked at my team. Their faces showed the same realization I felt. We were no longer observers on the outside looking in. We were part of whatever was happening out there. Harrow spoke first, his voice analytical. Sir, if they extended the perimeter to include our coordinates, that means the threat radius is larger than initially assessed. Standard protocol would be evacuation, not containment. He was right. Containment meant the threat couldn't be moved or neutralized quickly. It meant isolation and control until the situation stabilized. The fact they wanted us to stay put suggested they didn't want anyone leaving the area with information about what they had seen. At 2318 hours, something changed at the impact site. The red perimeter lights went out simultaneously, plunged into a void of darkness for 30 seconds. Then a new light appeared. It wasn't red. It was a pale blue, cold and steady, emanating from the ground itself near where the object lay. Briggs had his optics up immediately. Captain, you need to see this. I took the scope. The blue light pulsed slowly, illuminating the contractors gathered around the object. They had it partially uncovered now. I could see its shape clearly for the first time. It was cylindrical, approximately 7 feet long, and tapered at both ends. The surface was smooth and reflective, without visible seams or markings. It looked manufactured, but not by any industrial process I recognized. The blue light came from underneath it, seeping through the sand like liquid luminescence. The contractors moved carefully around it, their body language tense and deliberate. One held a scanning device pointed at the object. Another appeared to be taking samples from the surrounding soil. Salazar's equipment registered the light as electromagnetic radiation in the visible spectrum, but with properties that didn't match any known source. It's not combustion, not electrical discharge, Salazar noted. The wavelength is wrong for standard lead or plasma. I don't know what the hell that is. The blue light pulsed 3 times, then faded to a dim, ghostly glow. The contractor stepped back in unison, creating distance. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the object itself began to emit light, not from any specific point, but from the entire surface at once. It was a soft white luminescence that grew steadily brighter. Haro's voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. There's no power source, no visible mechanism. It's just glowing. The glow intensified until it hurt to look at directly. The contractors raised protective shields. The light reached peak intensity, held for 5 seconds, then vanished instantly. Total darkness returned. When my vision adjusted, the object sat unchanged, but the sand around it had fused into a dark, jagged glass. Did you see that? Briggs asked. The sand? It crystallized. Salazar pulled up thermal imaging. The fused sand registered temperature readings over 2,000 BROFF. That kind of heat should have incinerated everything within 20 meters. The contractors should have been dead. But they stood unharmed, continuing their work as if nothing had happened. Something about that wrongness finally broke through my training. I picked up the radio. Range control, Sierra 5. We have visual on recovery site. Observed anomalous thermal event and unknown luminescence from retrieved object. Request immediate clarification on threat level and safety protocols. The response came fast and sharp. Sierra 5. Disregard visual observations. Do not log or record details of recovery operations. You are to maintain position only. Acknowledge immediately. My hand tightened on the handset. They were ordering us to ignore it. Sierra 5 acknowledges. Maintaining position, not logging specifics. The voice confirmed. Correct. Stand by for morning debrief. Do not communicate with external channels. Range control out. Set the handset down slowly. Briggs stared at me. Salazar had stopped typing. Haro sat frozen at his console. We all understood what that order meant. We weren't supposed to remember this. At 23:47 hours, the contractors began packing their specialized equipment. The object remained on the ground, now enclosed in what looked like a transparent containment field. The air around it shimmered like heat haze, but the temperature readings on our sensors showed extreme cold. They were using technology I had never seen in any briefing, manual, or training seminar. A heavy transport vehicle rolled into position, its engine a low, muffled rumble. The contractors attached cables to the containment field and began the process of lifting the object. It rose slowly, suspended without any visible support structure beneath it. The field held it steady as they guided it onto the transport bed. Once it was secured, they covered everything with a heavy black tarp, hiding the silver hull from the night. The blue lights returned briefly, sweeping across the site in methodical patterns, scanning, recording, and ensuring nothing was left behind. When they finished, the contractors climbed into their unmarked vehicles and began moving east, away from the restricted zone and away from us. As the transport passed within half a kilometer of our position, I felt that pressure in my chest again. My watch jumped forward exactly 3 minutes. Salazar's equipment registered another M-surge brief, but intense. The only evidence anything had happened was a patch of fused glass barely visible in the starlight. Haro broke the quiet, his voice sounding small in the cabin. Sir, what did we just witness? I wanted to tell him it was experimental aircraft wreckage, some new composite material that reacted strangely to heat, or a classified propulsion system that emitted unusual radiation. But I'd seen enough in my career to recognize when an explanation didn't fit the facts. That object wasn't built by any contractor I knew. The field it generated wasn't produced by any generator in our inventory. And the way it glowed, the way it fused sand into glass without harming anyone nearby, suggested technology we either didn't have or weren't supposed to know about. At 01:42 hours, movement caught my attention, not from the ridge, but from the east. A single vehicle was approaching on the main access road. No lights, just a dark shape moving steady through the night. Briggs saw it too. Contact. Single vehicle. Civilian model. No markings. The engine idled, exhaust visible in the cold air. Then the door opened and a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the vast stars. He walked toward us with purpose, carrying something in his right hand. Briggs had his rifle ready, but not raised. Standard protocol for an unidentified approach. As the figure drew closer, I noticed details. Military bearing, confident stride, mid-40s probably. He wore a standard Air Force uniform, but something about it looked off. It was too clean for field work. No dust, no wear, like he'd just put it on before driving out here. The figure stopped 10 meters away and called out, "Captain Hale, I'm Colonel Marcus Reeves, Air Force Special Projects. I need to speak with you and your team, Special Projects." The designation covered everything from legitimate research programs to operations so classified they didn't officially exist. I'd heard rumors about Special Projects officers. They showed up after incidents that couldn't be explained through normal channels. They asked questions, collected statements, and made problems disappear. "Sir, we weren't informed anyone was inbound," I called back. Reeves moved closer, stepping into the dim light from our vehicle. His face was weathered but calm, his eyes sharp and evaluating. "That's intentional, Captain. Sometimes the best security is no advance notice. May I approach?" I nodded. Briggs lowered his rifle but kept his hand near the grip. Reeves noticed but didn't comment. When he reached our position, he extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm and practiced. "I apologize for the late-hour visit," he said. "But what your team observed tonight requires immediate attention. We logged everything according to protocol, sir, awaiting morning debrief as instructed. I know. I read the preliminary reports." Past me toward the ridge. "But sometimes official reports don't capture the full picture. Sometimes soldiers see things that don't fit neatly into standard documentation." There it was. The real reason he'd come. He wanted to know what we really thought, not what we'd written in sanitized logs. This was the test. The moment where we either played along with the official narrative or expressed doubt that could follow us for the rest of our careers. "We observed what appeared to be a controlled descent of an unidentified object," I said carefully, "followed by recovery operations conducted by contractor personnel. Everything seemed consistent with classified test protocols." Reeves smiled slightly, not friendly, more like recognition. He knew I was being diplomatic. "Captain, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I can tell when soldiers are repeating approved language versus describing actual observations. You don't need to worry about career consequences with me. I'm here to assess, not punish." Salazar shifted his weight behind me. Harrow remained silent at his console. Briggs watched Reeves with the focused attention of someone evaluating potential threats. The tension was thick enough to cut. "With respect, sir," I said, "my team observed recovery operations inside a restricted zone. The specifics of those operations are above our clearance level. We documented what we could from our position and followed all instructions from range control." "You're a careful man, Captain Hale. That's good. The careful ones tend to have longer careers." He glanced at the others. "Your team as well. Disciplined, professional, exactly the kind of personnel we need for sensitive assignments." The implication was clear. This wasn't just a debrief. It was an evaluation. He was deciding whether we could be trusted with whatever truth lay behind tonight's events, or whether we needed to be managed more carefully. "Let me be direct," Reeves continued. "What you saw tonight will be classified under special access protocols. But before that happens, I need to understand what you actually observed. Not the sanitized version, the real one, because how we proceed depends on what you saw, and more importantly, what you think you saw." Difference between those two things. What we saw was factual. What we thought we saw involved interpretation, speculation, and conclusions that might not align with official explanations. He was asking us to cross a line, to admit doubt or confusion that could be used to discredit us later if needed. I made a decision. "Sir, we observed an object exhibiting characteristics inconsistent with known aerospace platforms. It generated electromagnetic fields strong enough to disrupt our equipment. It emitted light without visible power sources, and the recovery team handled it using containment procedures I've never seen in standard operations manuals." Reeves nodded slowly. "Go on. Lethal to nearby personnel. but the contractor showed no signs of injury or distress. And what conclusions did you draw from these observations? This was the critical question, the one that separated soldiers who followed orders from those who asked too many questions. Sir, I drew no conclusions. My job is recovery and observation, not analysis. Whatever that object was, it's being handled by people with appropriate clearance and expertise. Reeves held my gaze. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded once, a gesture of approval or perhaps respect. That's the right answer, Captain. The disciplined answer, the one that keeps you in the game. He looked at each of my team members in turn. Gentlemen, you've been exposed to classified material tonight. What you do with that exposure will define the rest of your careers. You can walk away, follow orders, and continue serving with distinction. Or you can obsess over questions you're not cleared to answer and watch everything you've built fall apart. The message was clear. Curiosity was dangerous. Silence was survival. I stepped outside. The air was colder now, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Sir, we weren't informed anyone was inbound. He moved closer. No insignia except rank. No unit patch. No name tape. That's intentional, Captain. What you observed tonight falls under special access protocols. I'm here to conduct preliminary debrief and ensure you understand the parameters of your continued assignment. Continued assignment, not relief, not dismissal. He wanted us to stay. Understood, sir. My team is ready. He gestured to the command vehicle. Let's talk inside. We gathered around the small table. Reeves set a tablet down and powered it on. The screen showed satellite imagery of the impact site timestamped throughout the night. He scrolled through images methodically before looking up at us. Gentlemen, you've been granted temporary clearance for Project Silversmith. What you saw tonight was the recovery of experimental aerospace technology that exceeded performance parameters during a classified test flight. The object you observed is a prototype reconnaissance platform utilizing advanced materials and propulsion concepts. The explanation sounded rehearsed, official, designed to fit what we'd seen while revealing nothing meaningful. Harrow shifted in his seat. Salazar stared at his hands. Briggs kept his face neutral. Not deception exactly. More like practiced omission. The electromagnetic effects you experienced are byproducts of the propulsion system shutting down. The thermal event was a controlled discharge of residual energy. Everything you witnessed is documented and part of expected operational parameters. He paused, letting that sink in. Then his tone shifted harder. You are now bound by special access security protocols. You will not discuss tonight's events with anyone outside this room. Not your commanding officers, not your families, not each other after you leave this assignment. Violation carries consequences beyond military discipline. Do you understand? We all answered in unison. Yes, sir, he nodded. Good. You'll remain on station until 0800. At that time, you'll be relieved and returned to Nellis for administrative processing. Your assignment logs will be classified. Your service records will reflect routine recovery operations only. He stood, preparing to leave. I had one question I couldn't suppress. Sir, the object we recovered, is it ours? Reeves looked at me for a long moment. Define ours, Captain. He didn't wait for a response. He left the vehicle and drove away into darkness. The question hung in the air like smoke. Define ours. As if ownership was complicated, as if the answer depended on definitions we weren't cleared to know. After Reeves left, none of us spoke for 20 minutes. We sat in the command vehicle, listening to the generator hum and the wind scrape against metal. Salazar's equipment had stabilized, showing normal readings across all frequencies. The electromagnetic field was gone. The signal had stopped. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But my watch still showed the wrong time. The fused glass still sat out there on the ridge, and Reeves's questions still echoed in my head. Define hours. At 1:42 hours, Briggs finally broke the silence. Permission to speak freely, sir, I nodded. We were past formality now. That wasn't one of ours. I don't care what the colonel said. I've seen every prototype the Air Force has tested. Nothing in our inventory generates fields like that. Nothing glows without a power source, and nothing fuses sand into glass without killing everyone nearby. The descent profile bothered me from the start. 70,000 feet to ground level in under 10 minutes with no engine signature. That's not aerodynamically possible with any aircraft we have, not even hypersonic gliders. Salazar pulled off his headset in the signal. I've analyzed every military and civilian transmission protocol. That pattern doesn't match anything in the database. It wasn't random interference. It was structured like language. They were saying out loud what we'd all been thinking. I should have shut it down. Should have reminded them about special access protocols and career consequences. But I was their team leader, and they deserved honesty, even if it was dangerous. I don't know what we saw, I said carefully, but I know what we're going to say. We saw an experimental aerospace platform using advanced materials. That's the official story. That's what goes in every report, every conversation, every thought from this point forward. Briggs met my eyes. And if we don't believe that story, then you keep that to yourself. You lock it away, and you never speak it again because the alternative is losing everything you've worked for and possibly facing federal charges. They're not asking us to forget. They're asking us to choose silence. The weight of that choice settled over the vehicle like pressure before a storm. We'd all signed non-disclosure agreements when we took this assignment. We knew classified work came with restrictions, but this felt different. This felt like being asked to unsee something true and replace it with something comfortable. At 2:30 hours, range control called with final instructions. A relief team would arrive at 0800 to take over our position. We were to return directly to Nellis, report to Building 1113, and await individual debriefing. Our equipment would be inspected. Our logs would be collected. We'd be placed on administrative leave pending security review, standard procedure for classified incidents. We'd be isolated, evaluated, and eventually returned to regular duty with the understanding that tonight never happened. Most soldiers went through this process and adapted. They learned to separate what they experienced from what they were allowed to remember. But some didn't adapt. Some carried the weight of unspoken truth until it broke them. I'd seen it before. Good soldiers driven to obsession by things they couldn't talk about. Careers destroyed not by disclosure but by the internal conflict between duty and honesty. I looked at my team and wondered which path we'd take. As dawn approached, the desert began to reveal itself in shades of gray and amber. The ridge looked ordinary now, just another low rise in endless terrain. The impact site was invisible from our position. By the time the sun fully rose, even the fused glass would be covered by wind-blown sand. Harrow packed his analysis equipment methodically. "Sir, can I ask something off the record?" "Off the record doesn't exist anymore, but go ahead. Do you think we're alone in the universe?" I chose my words carefully. I think the universe is bigger than any of us can comprehend. And I think our government has been operating in that desert for 70 years, conducting research we're not cleared to know about. Whether those two facts are connected, I can't say. He nodded slowly. It wasn't an answer, but it acknowledged the question was valid. At 6:47 hours, headlights appeared from the east. 2 vehicles, military this time, our relief team. They parked beside us and 6 soldiers stepped out, looking fresh and alert. Their team leader, a staff sergeant I didn't recognize, approached with paperwork. "Captain Hale, I'm here to relieve Sierra 5. We'll take over observation duties. You're clear to return to base." I signed the transfer documents without reading them, standard protocol. He saluted. I returned it. And just like that, our assignment was over. We loaded into our vehicles and started the long drive back to Nellis. The highway stretched empty in the early morning light. Salazar drove while I sat passenger, watching the desert roll past. Somewhere behind us, that ridge held evidence of something unexplained. But by the time anyone thought to look, it would be gone, covered, removed, or sanitized until only sand remained. That's how secrets stayed buried. Not through aggressive suppression, but through methodical erasure. The government didn't need to silence witnesses when it could simply remove all evidence that anything had happened. We reached Nellis at 9:23 hours. Building 1113 sat on the secure side of the base, surrounded by chain link and guard posts. We were processed separately. Equipment inspected, logs collected, personal devices examined. My individual debrief lasted 2 hours. 3 officers asked the same questions in different ways. "What did you see? What did you record? Who did you tell?" I gave consistent answers, kept my tone professional, and showed no signs of psychological distress. They seemed satisfied. The senior officer, a colonel whose name I never learned, handed me a single sheet of paper. "Captain, you and your team performed admirably under unusual circumstances. Your professionalism reflects well on your unit. The assignment you completed last night has been classified under special access protocols. Your service record will note successful completion of recovery operations. Or nothing more. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. You're on administrative leave for 72 hours. Use that time to decompress. When you return, you'll be reassigned to standard duties. Questions? No, sir. Dismissed. I left building 1113 and found my team waiting in the parking lot. They looked tired but intact. We drove to a diner off base and sat in silence for the first 10 minutes. The waitress brought coffee. We drank it black and bitter. Finally, Briggs spoke. We just go back to normal. The deal, I said. We saw something. We reported it. Command handled it. Now we move forward. Salazar stared into his cup. But we know what we saw. We know what we think we saw. Memory's unreliable. Stress distorts perception. That's what they'll say if we ever bring it up, and they're not entirely wrong. Harrow shook his head. Come on, Captain. You saw that thing glow. You saw the sand fuse into glass. You felt that field in your chest. Are you really going to pretend it was just experimental aircraft? I met his eyes. I'm going to do my job, which is following orders and protecting classified information. That's what we signed up for. If you can't do that, tell me now so I can help you process out before it destroys your career. The harshness in my voice surprised even me, but I needed them to understand. This wasn't about truth or curiosity. It was about survival in a system that demanded obedience over understanding. Nobody spoke after that. We finished our coffee and left. Over the next 3 days, I didn't hear from any of them. The administrative leave felt more like quarantine. I stayed in my apartment, watched television, and tried not to think about blue lights and fused glass. On the 4th day, I reported back to duty. My new assignment was logistics coordination at Nellis. Desk work, safe, boring, and far removed from anything classified. Salazar got transferred to a signals intelligence unit in Germany. Harrow went to flight test engineering at Edwards. Briggs took an early discharge and disappeared from military life entirely. They separated us. Standard procedure after exposure to sensitive operations. Can't compare notes if you're on different continents. Can't build conspiracy theories if you never see each other again. 6 months later, I received a letter from Harrow. He'd found my civilian mailing address somehow. The letter was brief, carefully worded, and said nothing explicit. But between the lines, I understood. He was still thinking about that night, still trying to make sense of what we'd seen. I burned the letter and never replied. Years passed. I finished my service and transitioned to civilian life. Got a job with a defense contractor doing mundane consulting work. I married, bought a house, built a normal life. The desert became a distant memory, filed away with other experiences I didn't talk about. But sometimes late at night, I'd wake up with that metallic taste in my mouth. I'd feel pressure in my chest for no reason. My watch would skip forward a few minutes, and I'd remember standing at that boundary marker, looking at something that shouldn't exist. I never searched for answers, never looked into Project Silvermyth or tried to reconnect with my team. Some doors once closed should stay that way. Curiosity might be natural, but survival requires discipline. Still, I think about Reeves's question, define ours. The implication was clear. The object we recovered that night belonged to someone, but ownership was complicated. Maybe it was experimental technology developed in classified programs, so secret even the military didn't fully understand them. Maybe it was something else entirely. I'll never know. And that's the hardest part. Not the uncertainty itself, but accepting that uncertainty is permanent. We're trained as soldiers to seek clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Success or failure, enemy or ally. But some situations don't fit those categories. What I do know is this. The desert near Groom Lake holds things we're not meant to see. The government operates programs beyond normal oversight. And soldiers like me stand on boundaries we're not allowed to cross. Watching shapes in the darkness we're not allowed to name. That's not conspiracy. That's reality. Classified, compartmentalized reality that exists whether you believe in it or not. If you're serving in the military now, especially in test ranges or restricted areas, you might face something similar. You might see something that doesn't fit your training or understanding. Or when that happens, you'll have a choice. You can push for answers and probably destroy your career in the process, or you can do what I did. Follow orders, maintain silence, and trust that someone above your pay grade is handling it appropriately. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's the reality of serving in a system that operates on need-to-know basis. And sometimes you don't need to know. The hardest lesson I learned that night wasn't about what existed beyond our understanding. It was about the limits of my authority and the price of curiosity. Some knowledge comes with costs that exceed its value. I stood at a boundary and held my ground. I saw something impossible and walked away. That takes a different kind of courage than combat. The courage to accept that not every question deserves an answer. Years later, I still don't regret that choice. My career survived. My clearances remained intact. I got to build a normal life after service. Would I have had any of that if I'd pushed for the truth? Probably not. But late at night, when I can't sleep and that metallic taste returns, I wonder what happened to that object, where it went, what they learned from it, whether it was truly ours, or if we were just temporary custodians of something borrowed. I wonder if somewhere in a facility even more restricted than Area 51, someone is studying what we recovered, someone with higher clearance and deeper knowledge, piecing together secrets I'll never access. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe they cataloged it, stored it, and filed it away in some warehouse alongside 1,000 other unexplained objects. Maybe the truth is mundane. Government bureaucracy applied to the extraordinary, reducing mystery to paperwork and storage protocols. And I've made peace with that. The desert keeps its secrets. Orders change, programs evolve, and soldiers rotate through assignments they'll never discuss. But somewhere out there, the work continues. People in unmarked vehicles recovering things that shouldn't exist, repursing boundaries most civilians never see, maintaining the gap between public knowledge and classified reality. If you're one of those people, you already understand the silence isn't weakness. It's not complicity. It's the price of service in a world more complex than official narratives suggest. Hold that line. Follow those orders. And when you see something impossible, do what I did. Log it, report it, and let it go. Because at the end of the day, we're soldiers, not scientists. Maybe that makes me complicit in keeping secrets. Or maybe it just makes me a good soldier. You decide which matters more. The desert remembers even when we're told to forget.